Oh, Joyce, having tea. So you're live now, Joyce, having your cup of tea.
Cheers.
Sadly, we can't hear you.
I was saying it was remiss of me not to have my BBK mug.
Well, yes.
I could go and decant it. I could go and decant it into my BBK mug.
Yes, letting the side down there. So it decided to rain every time I got out the car today.
Right, I'm letting everyone in. Hello, Pam.
It's me that's on it. Pam's going on another Zoom on something else later. So
Oh, right, that's all right. You can swap notes later on.
Yeah. Well, I can watch it on Bibber if I need, on BBKA if I need to.
maybe.
Welcome everybody. It's about 5 minutes. We're going to start. There's people still coming in. I hope you're all having better weather than I'm having up in the Lake District.
Only just. It looks like it's going to rain here in Oldham.
We had a perfect Lake District day today. It was glorious sunshine, and I was getting soaked by a shower as it went past. To see you back, Andrew, I was beginning to worry.
Done a runner.
Evening all.
Good evening. Another 2 minutes and then we'll kick off.
Kick off where?
I think we've got a heckler.
Oh, sorry. I'm going to mute myself. Sorry.
That's all right.
You've still got your camera off, Diane. Is that because you're being
was-
Oh, right.
I was frowning at technology. I've put the YouTube link on the website, but rather than everyone see just how much I frown at when I'm typing things in, I thought I'd stop the camera.
I was just looking at 54 participants on the 56 now, and thinking you might not actually need the YouTube link.
No, the advantage of it though is it saves me downloading the video and then uploading it.
Oh, right.
So
Okay.
it saves me a little job.
There'll be a number of people will watch that couldn't make it this evening.
Yeah, I think something clashes. Was it Bibber Stewart said Pam's gone off to watch?
Sorry, say that again, Diane.
Somebody said there's another beekeeping talk on this evening.
No, there isn't, Diane. The
Oh,
bib
there
was
isn't.
earlier.
Oh, right.
And I thought my other one was tonight, but it's not, it's tomorrow.
Oh, that's all right, Pam. You're with us
Amen.
then.
But my old branch has got its honey show and AGM tonight, so
Right, it is on 7 o'clock. So welcome everybody to this talk update on the Asian hornet. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you could make sure that your microphones are muted during the talk. There will be time for questions afterwards.
Yeah.
And when we get to that point, I'll give you a briefing on how to ask questions. We do monitor the chat, but sometimes if you ask a question in the chat, it doesn't get caught up with the meeting. So I'm going to hand over now to Andrew Durham, beekeeper from Cambridgeshire, who's become something of an expert on Asian hornets over the last 3 years. And he's going to give us an update on where we are with Asian hornet, and not to be too complacent just because things have not been that active this year. So I'll hand over now to Andrew. Thank you very much for giving us the talk today.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Well, first of all, I think this is going to last under an hour, just in case some of you are wondering what's how long it'll last. I think probably 50 minutes. Thank you for joining me for this special briefing in Asian Hornet Week, or as we are now urged to call it, the Yellow-Legged Hornet Week. Thanks to the press coverage that followed last year's Asian Hornet Week, and to the continuing efforts of DEFRA, the BBKA, beekeeping associations, everyone is now on the lookout for the Asian hornet, and that is exactly what is needed right now in this pre-establishment phase where the hornet is here but has yet to get established. The challenge now will be to maintain vigilance, especially if this year we see a significant drop in nest numbers, which is likely, but there's plenty of reporting season to go, and it's important you understand why there are wide fluctuations in nest numbers from year to year. So tonight I want to look very briefly at the single biggest factor behind the wide variations in nest numbers year to year. Then we'll look across the channel to see what's happening there. Some of the information we are getting, especially on social media, is becoming a problem. So I'll be looking at some of the lies, damn lies, and statistics, as Mark Twain put it. We'll look in detail at the risk to human health. We'll see where the danger lies, because there are some people who need to take extra care. We'll have a look at the different strategies now being adopted in France and Belgium, and we'll look at the Belgian beekeeper nest destruction teams and ask the question, is it actually such a good idea? Lastly, I want to talk about the use of Trojan bait trapping. It's coming up more regularly now. Is it the answer? Some beekeepers evidently think it is. This year, there have been lots of reports comparing spring trapping numbers and reported nest numbers with the same period last year. Such a comparison is only truly valid if the two periods have the same conditions, and key to what is happening is the weather. So we'll start with this because it unlocks a lot of what is happening both here and across the channel. I have previously explained that in a surge year, a mild winter will see more foundress queens survive and more first nests. An early spring with no hard frosts following gets them off to a good start. More first nests become secondary nests. And then a warm, prolonged autumn doesn't mean more nests, but it does mean bigger, more populous nests that can support and thus produce more foundress queens. So the development of the hornet nest during the year is dependent on the weather. In a normal year, the growth of the hornet nest starts with just the queen. She will typically be emerging in March, April. The nest grows exponentially, meaning that at first there are very few hornets, and it is the number of worker hornets that constrains the growth of the nest. By early September, the nest transitions to producing sexuals. It's a gradual transition. The growth curve is getting steeper. The nest is getting bigger and more populous. Now, the queen usually dies in early November, so no more brood, and the nest fails when frosts and winter arrives, killing off the workers and any remaining brood. So we can say that the window of opportunity for foundress queen production can be represented here by that red box. If the year starts cool and wet, then many queens emerge later, as has happened in France this year. Fewer first nests survive because of the more difficult conditions, so fewer nests. It also means that the growth curve starts later. If the weather continues to be poor, that stunts the growth of the nest, flattening the growth curve, there are fewer worker hornets to support brood. So the window is much smaller, and so fewer found-dress queens are produced for next year. In a year with an early warm and sunny spring, the growth curve starts as early as February, so the nest has more time to develop and has more workers to support the brood. The window's larger. And in a surge year, the nest not only gets going earlier, but as the season is extended, more sexuals can be developed to maturity even after the queen has died and go off to mate. Now, I've told you previously about Morbihan in southern Brittany. You can see the establishment phase in the blue years, the Loot Collective, the collective struggle, that's the departmental nest destruction scheme, started in 2015. But even after that, numbers were fluctuating year on year, as you can see there. Linked, it was reported by the scheme's managers, to the weather. Last year, the numbers increased in Morbihan because following on from the 2022 surge, some municipalities, that's effectively what we used to refer to as communes, had pulled out of the scheme due to cost. You must expect nest numbers to fluctuate widely year to year and not lose sight of the hornet's considerable reproductive capacity given the right conditions. What you see here is a department that operated a widespread spring trapping campaign and an efficient nest destruction and reporting program. Numbers in this department were held at 60 to 65% of those in neighbouring departments. So the scheme was actually very successful. Across the channel, with all that in mind, let's go across. There's no need to panic. That's the message Frank Alatrou, the president of the French National Syndicate of Professional Beekeepers, gave to his members in the August issue of the magazine The Bee, although he wasn't just referring to the Asian hornet. This year, beekeeping in France has had a very tough start. After a mild winter, there were freezing temperatures in the latter part of January. Then it turned very mild, but with a prolonged, very wet and cloudy start to spring. In April, they had a period of cooling with sharp frosts in the plains and snow on the low-lying hills. So found-dress queens emerged, only to find very difficult conditions for their first nests. Many will not have survived. Even in the department of Manche in Normandy, overlooking the Channel Islands, that has 7,000 reported nests last year, has seen a sharp drop in nest reports. The magazine of the French National Association of Bee Health Groups featured a major article on apiary defences in its July-August issue. It's by our old friends in the AAVO, Les Amis d'Abeilles de Val d'Oise, the Friends of the Bees of the Val d'Oise, who are doing a sterling job of spreading news on measures for protecting the apiary. Nothing that we didn't cover last September in part 2, which is still available on YouTube, and there's a PDF on the BBKA's resources page. Interesting to see that France's National Institute for Agriculture and the Environment, INRAE, has been conducting its own 2-year assessment of the harpe électrique in its apiaries outside Bordeaux. This was their interim conclusion. And I'm not suggesting you all rush out to make or buy electric harps, but it should reassure you to know that this very effective defence is available should we have need of it. Now, this came up on the BBKA's Facebook page on Sunday, showing the limit of the Asian hornet's expansion across Europe as at the 5th of January 2024. It is produced by the Muséum National de l'Histoire Naturelle. It simply shows where the hornet had been reported. Colonised is not the correct term. The MNHN have a nasty habit of colouring in the map where there has been a single nest reported. Doesn't matter to them if the nest is destroyed. Once green, it stays green. Now, beware jumping to the conclusion that just because the hornet is reported somewhere, that establishment is inevitable, albeit it is likely if the area is suitable. The situation you have to watch for, and the one we are in, is where the spread is from an adjoining area, because in that instance, the odds for the hornet are much more in its favour. That's why there's so much concern about growing numbers in Belgium and northern France. Recently, I was hearing of a comment from an English beekeeper based in the Isère department on the eastern side of France. The town of Vienne, from where the report apparently originated, is indicated by the red circle. He was reported as saying, well, we have Asian hornets in our apiary, don't know all the fuss is about, it's all scaremongering. Last year, I showed you this French model. The deeper the yellow, the greater the favourability to the hornet. The hornet didn't arrive in Isère until 2015, 10 years after its introduction to France, and was far less prolific in the east. Even now, it has considerably fewer hornets than many departments in the west. In fact, a third of the nest density reported in parts of Normandy last year. 2,381 nests in an area that is half the area of Flanders in Belgium, which last year had 6,400 nests, almost a third more nests in terms of nest density. So whilst I'm happy for the English beekeeper in Vienne, he has less of a problem in eastern France than Flemish beekeepers just across the channel, where the hornet is well established beyond eradication. Belgium has also had a mild winter, but it was the second warmest spring since 1883. Given that they carried over a lot more foundress queens, it should be no surprise to you that they have more nests. Interesting that there are fewer nests in the far west towards the channel, which will have had the same weather influences that we've had. The Flemish Beekeeping Institute report increasing Asian hornet nest numbers. More nests were reported in Flanders in the first half of this year than in the same period last year. Now, this was the position for Flanders region as at the 17th of August, but unfortunately, there's no number to that. You can see we now have a mix of confirmed and unconfirmed reports. This was southern Belgium as at the end of 2023, so 31st of December. As with Flanders in northern Belgium, the Walloon Department of Agriculture also reports increasing Asian hornet nest numbers in 2024. Now, so we can make a comparison, this was Wallonia up to the 20th of August 2023. A lot of nests yet to be reported for that year, and it shows how many don't get reported until the autumn when the leaves drop. And this was the same period this year. Despite what the government is saying, it appears there are far fewer nests. But if you look just below Brussels, top centre, we can clearly see a dense cluster of nests. So I look closer. A lot more nests this year, with more being reported every day compared with last year. What we are actually seeing is the reporting system breaking down following the Walloon government's devolvement of nest destruction down to provinces and municipalities. It's a problem that was highlighted in a report last October for Colos, the task force meeting, where they were reporting that funding was no longer proportionate. There was a patchwork of managed and unmanaged areas, and management regulation still needs to be adopted, and it was more challenging to monitor nests and their management due to the fact there were too many actors. So it's ironic that in France, the one thing they are now trying to establish is a coordinated national reporting system. The Belgians had that, albeit in two halves, but now they've lost it. A lesson for us, and we'll come back to the Belgian situation later. Now, we are bombarded with sound bites, especially on media such as Facebook. We should remind ourselves of the famous quotation attributed to Mark Twain when it comes to statistics, and look beyond the sound bites, because it is really important that we make decisions based on accurate information. A major concern to beekeepers is colony losses due to the hornet. The one reason one should immediately be on guard when this statistic comes up is because INRAE tells us it's not possible to put a percentage on colony losses due to the hornet. But that didn't deter the researchers behind this study, which got a lot of coverage and is widely quoted. People have seized on two sentences in the paper's abstract. One stated that colony losses could reach up to 29.2% of the national honeybee livestock each year in a high predation scenario. The other was they stated that they had estimated an overall nest density of one hornet nest for every square kilometre of France, over 500,000 nests. I've heard that quoted this week already. The researchers used the Behave computer model to calculate losses from predation from a limited amount of data that had been collected in field trials in the years 2013 to 17. The paper's actual findings resulted in a very different result. Combining large-scale field data, niche modelling techniques and agent-based models, we estimated at least 2.6% to 29.2% of bee colonies. And that finding, I'll just go back a second so I don't jump that one. Furthermore, the much quoted nest density was arrived at by researchers selecting areas at random, visiting the areas after the leaves had dropped in November, questioning locals and driving hundreds of kilometres on public roads around the selected target area, looking for nests in trees or on buildings. I think that's more about unreported nests. The researchers then used this observed nest numbers to model and predict nest density across the whole French territory, running a random forest model with a number of explanatory variables, and we projected this relationship across space, sounding like Star Trek now, to predict the potential density of hornet nests over France. When you see what's in the actual body of the paper, it all starts to look a little bit less like an exercise in really determining losses or really determining nest densities. But look at the title again. This was a cost analysis paper. There was no attempt to factor in beekeeper intervention, and the figure of one nest per square kilometre is a meaningless statistic, except in a calculation of potential national cost. And by the way, all the field work took place prior to the major surge years of 2018 and 22. The whole study had taken so long it was out of date before it was even published. If we must put a percentage on losses due to the hornet, I prefer to quote Dennis Thierry. He is the director of INRAE on their Bordeaux campus. He has been closely involved with the Asian hornet situation from the outset. In 2021, he was interviewed for UNAF's Bees and Flowers magazine. He said this, which translates to that. Today, we estimate the hornet causes in some areas 30% of hive losses, although we sorely lack precise data. It's an informed guess, and it's not dressing itself up to be anything else. 30% of losses in some areas. Now, people seem to have difficulty getting their head around that 30% of losses statistic. So let's see if I can do this with a graphic. If my bees are in an area where they're being predated by the Asian hornet, and I have 40 hives, and I lose 10 of them, which is a 25% loss, then Dennis is saying 3 of the 10 hives, 30% of my loss, were likely to be lost due to the Asian hornet. The other 7 were down to a multitude of other factors besetting our bees: pathogens, pesticides, varroa, loss of forage, queen problems, etc. Now, I didn't pluck 25% out of thin air. That is the national average percentage of dead and non-viable colonies over winter in each of the last 6 years, bar the last one, according to the ESA survey. I have to say bar the last one because the ESA did the survey and they normally produce the results by the middle of July, but now they tell me it's going to be the end of September. I find that all very ominous. Of course, the big lie in these statistics is that even if 30 of my 40 colonies are viable, what shape are they in? How much effort has to go into making them healthy and productive colonies? Another major concern is the risk to human health from the Asian hornet. Our Chief Plant Health Officer, Professor Nicola Spence, says that the hornet is no greater, or poses no greater risk to human health than our native wasps and hornets. But is that true? And on what is it based? We'll look back at that in just a moment. On screen is another soundbite in a recent article. The problem with that soundbite is that it can underplay a risk of which some people need to be aware. Last September, I told you about Olivier Cano. He is a former member of Tilly Sassoul who died as a result of a mass attack whilst acting as an AHAT referent. He had gone to confirm a nest in a house in the village when he suffered a mass attack by hornets and died. Had Olivia known of the toxicity risk from the multiple stings from Vespa velutina, might he have thought twice before volunteering to be an AHAT referent, given it was reported he had a heart problem? I also told you of the loss of a well-known beekeeper in the Pas-de-Calais department, Christine Dutoit, who had been stung by a single Vespa velutina whilst collecting leaves in her garden. She had suffered a rapid anaphylactic reaction and died as a result. And in fact, one of our bee inspectors suffered an anaphylactic reaction when stung whilst locating an Asian hornet nest. Did they know of the increased susceptibility of some beekeepers to systemic reactions, and that the hornet has a propensity to initiate such a reaction in someone previously sensitized by bee stings? But I'm jumping ahead. Let's go back to that soundbite. The scientific paper referred to by the article was this one, and the article drew attention to the fact that the paper reported a low number of deaths from the hornet, wasp and bee stings across the whole of Spain. 78 deaths over 20 years from 1999 to 2018. That's not a high figure. But in this instance, that quote is completely out of context, because what the author of the paper, Jesus Fierce, was actually highlighting is quite different to what was inferred. Jesus was actually reporting that there has been an increase in the rate of fatalities in two of the most infested regions in Spain following the establishment of the Asian hornet in those areas. And he was warning that due to its habits, abundance and broader distribution, the risk that Vespa velutina represents to human health is unmatched by other Hymenoptera native species. This goes to the heart of the problem: the Asian hornet's aggression in defending its nest, the number of hornets in a nest, the much greater nest numbers when established. These are the first clues that Nicola Spence's statement may be incorrect. The same news article also quoted a 2016 conference paper by Karine Monceau and the person I've just mentioned, Denis Thierry. It was not research, but that's not important. What was important was the research paper that Monceau and Thierry referred to in their conference paper, because it was that which led to statements about the risk to human health issued by the French government and which have subsequently been repeated by our government. It was a 2010 study by Luc de Haro that looked at reports of stings by Hymenoptera in France in the 4 years following the arrival of the hornet. Now note here that we are not looking at deaths, but at envenomation or sting cases serious enough to be registered at French poison centres or in A&E. The research concentrated on departments where the Asian hornet was present in the years immediately following the hornet's introduction into France, shown as grayed in this table. They found no rise in the reported cases of envenomation. That would not be true today. The weakness in this analysis is the very short time that the hornet had been in the departments, only 1 or 2 years in most cases, which means the number of nests was very low in very large departments, and at that time the nests were typically high up in the trees and out of the way. The biggest danger was to tree surgeons or people trying to destroy the nests. It is ironic that the study commented on the situation in Indonesia as being different because nests are frequently built in villages, thus greatly enhancing the possibility of attack, which is exactly what has subsequently happened in France. There was a follow-up report in 2015, which is often associated with Luke's report, but this time they only looked at data at a national level from 2009 to 13. This time it did note a small increase in cases associated with the Asian hornet. Again, the weakness in this very superficial study is that by only looking at the national figure, the result for the departments with high nest numbers were greatly diluted. These 2 French papers are still being quoted to support the contention that the Asian hornet is no more of a risk to our health than our own hornet or wasps. They were flawed, and if that statement itself is contentious, then let us at least recognise that they're out of date. But I want to go back to Galicia because there was more to what Jesus Fierce was actually highlighting. Jesus tells us that the hornet had arrived in northeast Spain in Navarre, just across the border with France in 2010. The hornet spread rapidly along the coastal regions of northern Spain. It first arrived in Galicia in 2012, which is that red and orange area top left. By 2014, it was established beyond eradication. Once it had been established, nest numbers began to rise. In fact, soar. Jesus called on Spanish data for deaths in category X23. In the 15 years prior to the hornet becoming established in Galicia, the annual death rate in X23 had been less than 1 death for every million inhabitants. In fact, for 9 of those 15 years, there had been no fatalities recorded at all in that category. Following the hornet's establishment, the rate started to increase, and in the hornet surge year of 2018, it tripled to 2.22 deaths per million inhabitants. Now, in a region of 2.7 million people, that was 6 deaths from stings in a single year. 4 more deaths than in any of the previous 19 years that had actually recorded a death in category X23. That was in a population equivalent to that of Greater Manchester. 2018 was a turning point in Galicia. The Galician Health Services implemented a specific quick route of care for people presenting at health centres or hospitals with the symptoms of a systemic reaction following a Hymenoptera sting. This was a sensible and proportionate response. The risk to the general population was still low, but nevertheless, it was real. In his paper, Jesus concluded, in light of these findings, there is evidence to abandon the notion that the invasive species Vespa velutina poses no greater risk to human health than a bee. Of course, a lot of people get stung without getting onto the government statistics. Many receive multiple stings, and here you see the report by the Department of Monche's Luke Collective for the period 2017 to 22. The municipalities or parishes were asked to report to the scheme the number of cases where people were stung and whether this had resulted in a serious outcome. In the Hornet surge year of 2018, they reported over 300 victims of Vespa velutina stings, 9 of whom received 10 or more stings. We'll see the significance of that soon. 4 cases of anaphylactic shock, 1 of whom died. In the surge year of 2022, almost 400 people were victims of Vespa velutina stings, and 11 of those victims got more than 10 stings. 1 person actually got 30. That tiny little asterisk you see there is a note from the scheme managers that in 2021, the town halls stopped reporting the outcome of stings. And that's just in one department that has the area of Devon. These figures cannot be dismissed as infrequent injuries. Now, we don't have time tonight to go into all the other following papers in detail, so I'm just going to give you an indication of some of the other research that has been going on. China, 2013, a clinical study of the toxicological aspects of wasp sting patients. They call Vespa velutina a wasp. In multiple sting cases, the danger lay primarily in the toxicity of the venom. A detailed analysis of the wasp/hornet's venom revealed a very complex and in some respects unusual venom in a Hymenoptera, noting that it had a propensity to initiate a systemic reaction in sting victims and a toxicity in multiple sting cases. Or 2014, clinicians in Navarre were drawing attention to an unusual cross-reaction between the hornet's venom and the venom of other vespids. 2021, clinicians in Galicia, led by Professor Carmen Medal, Professor of Medicine at the University Hospital of Santiago de Compostela, was reporting that Vespa velutina was by far the leading cause of anaphylaxis in their region of northern Spain, and a cross-reaction with other vespids and Apis mellifera was indicated. This was followed very quickly by another paper on the allergy implications of Vespa velutina venom, confirming that the venom cross-reacted with Apis mellifera venom, meaning that Vespa velutina could trigger an anaphylactic reaction if the victim had already been sensitized by wasp or bee venom. It was noted that allergic reactions tended to be more severe. 2022, a study from clinicians in Portugal endorsed Vidal's analysis. In light of these findings, there is evidence to abandon the notion that the invasive species Vespa velutina poses no greater risk to human health than a bee. Well, I don't think that Jesus Fierce is a voice crying in the wilderness. There's now a growing body of research to back up that assertion. What the evidence suggests is that we have at least 3 categories of people who need to take extra care when it comes to the Asian hornet. Those whose health is compromised, perhaps with cardiovascular, liver or kidney disease, especially if they're over 65, because that group is overrepresented, because they are at increased risk, not just from a systemic reaction if they have been pre-sensitized, but more importantly, they're at risk from the toxicity of multiple stings, whether they've been pre-sensitized or not. Those who have already suffered a systemic reaction to Hymenoptera venom, such as wasp and bee venom, because they are already pre-sensitized. Anyone receiving multiple stings, and here the Chinese study indicates that 10 stings is a figure at which toxicity increases markedly, should seek medical help, and in France, the ones with 10 stings go to A&E. Other than that, the risk to the general population is very low. They just need to keep their eyes open and stay away from hornet nests. Now, I listened to Nigel Semmons's briefing earlier this week on the current strategy, and the response is impressive. But we've got to think beyond the MBU or aphid in the field and get a strategy agreed, or much of the MBU effort will have been for nothing. Although beekeepers are giving invaluable support by educating the public and monitoring bait stations, we should not let ourselves get distracted from the priority of getting our colonies as strong and healthy as possible, making sure that our beekeepers have the knowledge and, when required, the means to fight the hornet if or when it gets to them. So now let's look at what has happened with the French and Belgian strategies and keep asking yourselves, should we be doing it differently? Now, the first wrong step was for the French government to announce that they would only adopt a strategy that they believed would work. And so for the first 8 years, there was no strategy at all. Beekeepers were left to fend for themselves. The public relied on the fire brigade, which got involved in many departments, but that could not last. And so then they had to pay pest controllers. Even fewer nests got destroyed. By 2012, the Hornet was too established in many departments, but some departments did get publicly funded nest destruction schemes together, but they are expensive and take a lot of resource to run. This scheme in Calvados, the D-Day Beaches Landing Department, involved 45 pest controllers, 314 volunteer referents, and in the years you say here, with the exception of 2019, they were destroying 3,000 odd nests a year. That's over 360,000 euros in one department just to destroy the nests. That does not include the costs of running the scheme and employing the scheme managers. And at that time, Calvados was not that heavily infested. As I told some of you in the February update, as those schemes became more and more expensive, they started to fail, and so last year, 2023, a new French national plan was rolled out. Masterminded by GDS France, the overarching animal health body, its weakness was that it was a plan with no funding and a very poor substitute for the publicly subsidised schemes. It had too many tiers of management, too many committees, and was almost entirely reliant on volunteers, even for some of the key posts. It did not have a good first year. The plan was adopted in only 40% of departments. In some of those departments, the scheme managers under the former Loot Collective schemes carried on under existing contracts, but others didn't even have a departmental referent. Only 42% of the schemes that did get going implemented spring trapping, and 35% of volunteer bee health associations were doing the nest destruction themselves, which tells me that they didn't raise the funding. For 2024, the plan has been refined. Now, I see the influence of scientific representatives on the controlling committees. As infestation increases in an area, the destruction of nests will be restricted as a cost-saving measure. In heavily infested areas, they will concentrate on just the nests near apiaries or those that are a direct threat to the public, and they will leave the rest. Because of the concern about bycatch, spring trapping that can reduce nest numbers by more than 50% doesn't even come in at all until there is a medium level of infestation, which is assessed by the number of hornets hawking continuously in front of hives in apiaries. Difficult, if not impossible to manage. This is handing the hornets a free pass, and by the time you realize you're in a surge year and the infestation level has gone up, it's too late. Now, the publicly funded loot collectives were well supported by over 90% of the municipalities in those departments that ran schemes. The new version of the Lutte contre le frelon asiatique will not get the same support because the public will not see why they should pay for a scheme to support beekeepers when they, the general public, are left to pay for their own nest destruction. If the previous scheme lacked funding, this new scheme has no clothes at all. Now let's see what the Walloon government is doing in southern Belgium. Remember, Wallonia is the southern half of Belgium below that red line. What's interesting is the speed at which the Belgians have decided that the hornet is beyond eradication and have come up with a scheme especially for beekeepers. That's the green sector. Private citizens, the blue sector, on the other hand, will have to pay a pest controller. Publicly funded nest destruction, the red band, is confined to nests on public property that present a threat to the public, and that is where the nests are below 5 meters. Attempts to eradicate the hornet have ended. The support measures for the beekeeping sector include information to beekeepers on protecting their colonies, and this is coming mainly from CARI, which is a research organisation, a small group that supports beekeeping, bee research and the environment for apiculture. CARI have issued a series of leaflets for beekeepers. This one is about the spread of the hornet. Their estimate as to where the hornet will establish itself sufficiently to be a problem for beekeepers actually matches my best guess for the UK, which is from the Humber down to the Severn estuaries. They recognise the importance of beekeepers knowing the Asian hornet's life cycle. I've talked about that before. Advice on what to do if you disturb an Asian hornet nest. The answer is run, don't walk. You'll get rid of the hornets quicker if you run. It's advice on nest destruction. Spring trapping, but here CARI is actually lagging behind the French. This was an early French spring trapping plan and involved far too many traps. They're giving advice on the protection of apiaries. Doesn't really give enough detail, and it omits some very basic measures. Furthermore, it's still talking about 6 millimeter square mesh for museliers, which is too small during the foraging period. Things have moved on, and CARI is not up to date with the changes. That's the danger of legacy information sitting on the internet. The Wallonia government are trialling the effectiveness of a government-approved selective trap that is much simpler and cheaper than the expensive traps you can buy over here. They are looking to roll that out to their beekeepers for a spring trapping campaign this year, and then next year they'll roll it out further. Some of the current selective traps are just too expensive. Why you would want to pay 45 euros for one of these when you can get 10 of the simpler traps for the same money? A lot of this is just people riding on a wave of doubt over spring trapping. But the most innovative measure has been for the Wallonia government to equip and train beekeeper teams in nest destruction. For 2023, some 18 teams of beekeepers were equipped and trained to destroy nests. You can see their different areas on that map there. But they are only permitted to destroy nests within 1 kilometre of an apiary upon request by the registered beekeeper whose apiary is involved, and the government is going to set up a dedicated online reporting for them. Now let's look at the area covered by just one team, the Mons team. That's the area in light brown. That area is roughly 900 square kilometres, a third the size of Oxfordshire. And those blue dots are what the Mons area reported last year. There are hundreds of reported nests plotted there, and that will go up. Willie Borsus, who is the Wallonia Agriculture Minister, was talking earlier in the year about adding another 16 teams to the original 18, and he was looking to subsidise the recurrent costs. I'm no longer sure that that's the case, because his press communique announcing this proposal has mysteriously disappeared, and they appear to have reverted to last year's scheme. Now, there are reasons why this scheme may not be such a good idea. Some unrelated facts. Belgium has 10,000 registered beekeepers. The area of a 1 kilometre radius circle is roughly 3 square kilometres. Belgium as a country has an area of 30,000 square kilometres. Do the maths. If the public catch on to this scheme, I can well imagine ordinary citizens will go to beekeepers to demand nests are destroyed rather than contact pest controllers and pay. And I hope their vetting process for membership of these teams is asking questions about their general health of their members, whether they've even had a systemic reaction to a sting, and if they're beekeepers, how often were they stung recently? Because that's absolutely key to whether their immunity to stings is current. Okay, moving on to the last subject area. Trojan bait trapping. Is it the answer to the Asian hornet? Well, yes, of course it is, because if we can't find the nest to destroy, our only option is to get the hornet to do it for us. But it's not that simple. You need an authorized insecticide powerful enough to destroy the nest quickly, but not so powerful that the Trojan bait carriers don't make it back to the nest. It has to degrade quickly so it doesn't present a continuing risk to other animals that may plunder the nest, or if it falls to the ground, contaminate the water supply. It has to poison the nest, not just the brood, so using a protein bait to be fed to the larvae is not good enough. You need an efficient method of application. Gluing tiny bait containers to individual hornets, which is what this recent article in The Bee proposes, is such a manpower intensive operation that one has to ask how realistic it is and how many nests it could treat. Catching hornets in a net and treating them one by one, as you see Augustine doing here, might buy a short relief for your hives, but it will do nothing to reduce hornet nest numbers in general. The answer could well lie in this. It's the dry harp electrique. It is feasible to catch large numbers of Asian hornets in a dry electric harp that scientific field trials in Spain have found to be very selective indeed. Then you can spray large numbers of hornets in the capture chamber at the bottom through the mesh screen and release them at dusk to return to their nests. But I repeat, only when we get an approved insecticide. If beekeepers start using Trojan bait using unauthorized chemicals, where will that leave us in the public perception of beekeepers as the guardians of a sentinel species? It would completely undermine any campaigns on the use of, say, neonicotinoids. And right now, pesticides kill far more colonies than the Asian hornet. Identifying a suitable Trojan bait should be a top priority for research. And please put a chemist like Jesus Fierce on the job. Okay, so these papers are sitting there waiting for you on the BBKA Asian Hornet resources pages. Furthermore, there are 2 special briefing videos that the BBKA recorded last year. Just remains for me to thank the institutes and associations that made the information in this briefing available. So I thank you for your attention and I'll unshare my screen. I'm happy to answer as best I can any questions.
Yeah, if anybody wants, thank you very much, Andrew, for an interesting talk, which raises several concerns and some hope, possibly. If you want to ask a question, please press the raise hand facility at the bottom of your screen, and that'll promote you to the top of the screen. And I'll then ask you to unmute and ask the question. So are there any questions? Patrick Curry has got the first one to get a hand up.
Sorry, very quick on the mark and used to using Zoom. That was outstanding. And I'd like to thank Andrew very much. And I'm sure a lot of other people feel the same. There are so many questions in what you've said, but there's also a huge amount of evidence. And the number one thing I, as a person involved in a local level, somewhat collaboratively within the UK, but particularly at the European level, to me, absolutely the number one issue coming through is the gathering of evidence. And Jesus's name comes up again and again, together with Carmen Vidal. So I'd really like to find ways in which to see what we can do to benefit from the European experience in the gradual journey we're going on in the UK. Apologies to people. I put a number of questions in the chat as we've been going along. And Andrew, I would ask that we have a sidebar conversation amongst those who are interested on different topics to pick this up. But I'd really like to say thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Patrick. Are there any other questions? David, you put your hand up.
Lots of things are using they're using poisons. Would diatomaceous earth be a better material to destroy nests with? Which is what a lot of pest controllers use for wasps and other things. It's not a poison, but it desiccates the insect. It will get any insect you put it in a nest. It's not a specific. It's not poisonous, but it's. I believe it's quite effective at destroying a colony.
Well,
Blast them apart and spread them on the ground, but
okay, I can't tell you whether it is or not, but what I can tell you is that that is an avenue of investigation this year in Belgium, in the Wallonia area, because they've made that a key part of their scheme to find out whether it's effective or not. So the Belgians are pressing ahead with it, and we'll see what the results are.
I saw a comment from a German beekeeper who'd got his own diatomaceous probe and so on. The problem, of course, is getting them a probe that's high enough that you don't have to go up a flipping cherry picker.
That sounds like a statement, not a question. Okay.
It is really.
Any other questions?
I feel after that talk, if I may, sorry, I should put my hand up. Very bad.
Right. We've got on the screen now, we've got Vislav Lasky, you put your hand up.
Yes, please. I have my bees are on a farm at my cousin's in Mid Wales. I worry about his son going round hedges, cutting them. Okay, the bees haven't arrived in Wales yet, but are insect poisons like Malathion an effective spray that you could use to defend yourself if you happen to be cutting hedges and you get attacked by hornets in a tractor, for example?
I have no idea, but I do know that the advice, and it's very strong advice that's given in France, is that if you're hedge cutting or verge cutting, you should do it from a sealed cab. Because if you do disturb a hornet nest and they come out en masse, you will suffer a mass attack and they will attack very quickly. I don't know that you'll have much time to be spraying anything around. You're probably likely to be getting out of there as quickly as you possibly can.
Okay.
Then it was Catherine Andrews. Your hand was next.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Thank you again. Really informative and interesting talk. Thank you, Andrew. My question is also about concern for people being stung. And I just wanted to understand, when you say being previously sensitized by bee stings, what that is or how you recognize that. Because I and my husband have been stung many times and I've noticed I swell up much more than I used to. But how do I know if I've been sensitized?
Well, I would have said the normal way you would know if you've been sensitized is whether you are suffering the symptoms of a systemic reaction. So whether you've got basically the definition is that you have a reaction on another part of the body away from the area that has been stung. So typically, probably 70% of cases, somebody's going to get hives, that kind of odd rash, perhaps on their back or their front. They're going to have perhaps a reaction in the soft tissues, such as the lips, the tongue. That starts to swell up. Their eyes may go puffy. They're perhaps getting short of breath and giving a sort of very distinct whooping cough, feeling shortness of breath, faint, etc., etc. This, if it develops, can lead to a situation in which the patient kind of falls unconscious. And what's actually happening is the blood vessels are opening. because the body's overreacting, trying to pump the solution to the what it thinks is an absolute body-wide attack, and that lowers the blood pressure. And if that keeps going, you get to the point where the heart can't cope with the very low blood pressure, and you die. Of course, the key thing there is to make sure that the person either takes medicine very quickly from an EpiPen or something, dials 999 and gets themselves assistance, even as a short-term first aid measure, lies on their back, puts their knees up so that they concentrate the blood into the main body part of their body. These are all measures which actually every beekeeper should be aware of, and every beekeeper should be taught as part of a beginner's course, because it is a fact. Now, I'm going to say it's a fact. I'm going to explain what the justification for that statement is. There have been 200 and something papers worldwide about beekeepers being at increased susceptibility to a systemic reaction. A Slovenian paper, which I think was published earlier this year, brought all that data together and came to the conclusion that beekeepers as a group were, in the course of their lifetime, 24% more likely to suffer some sort of systemic reaction, 6% a serious reaction. Now that is way above the rate for the general population,
average,
and
yeah.
it is because you have been exposed continuously to honeybee venom. If you are regularly stung, you're actually in a much better position than you are if you are such a good beekeeper you never get stung. And it's known that people in the Mediterranean suffer this problem less than perhaps Northern European beekeepers that are on seasonal beekeeping because the bees are put to bed for winter. So it's a complicated situation. It doesn't mean everybody's susceptible, but what it does mean is that some are. And so it is essential that everybody is aware of the risk and knows what the symptoms are. So if you are in any doubt as to whether you're becoming sensitized, the best thing to do is go and see your doctor and have a chat with them.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Really interesting. A lot to take on. Thanks.
I did find when I was a first beekeeper, the more I got stung, the less I got sensitized.
Yep.
But the more experienced I've become, I don't get stung. Go slow.
Actually, probably the opposite. The answer is probably go and make sure you are stung.
But go slower.
Okay.
Did you have a question or just an observation?
I did. It was more along how many queens have we actually found this year? Does anybody know? Asian hornet queens, sorry.
Somebody else will have to answer that because it's on the DEFRA website. I don't tend to pay that much attention to what's happening in this country. I tend to concentrate on what's happening overseas because that's where our problem's coming from.
National Bee Unit said 9 they caught in their traps this year.
That's a good
My
start.
observation on that would be that for many years since the hornet first arrived here and built a nest in 2016, we have been protected by two things. One is the channel, because that undoubtedly is a barrier, and the other thing is we have perfidious weather in the UK, the famous English weather. Sorry if it's Welsh weather, but you know what I mean.
Thank God.
And it's so variable that you are unlikely to get a run where the hornet can get established, have enough nests, and then be able to really multiply after that because the weather will change. Now, we saw that last year. I think this year we're going to see a drop, but it's extremely dangerous to relax because what will happen now is if people suddenly kind of release the effort, they'll miss some hornet queens. And then next year, if we have good weather in the spring, all those factors I talked about at the very beginning, then we'll be off again on a sort of roller coaster. And as happened in Belgium, once it gets going, the numbers shoot up very quickly.
Sorry, Andrew, has anybody else found out that wasps are so minimal this year as well.
Yeah, I know where they are. They're all in my apiary.
Not mine.
Yeah, they are mine.
Bless. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Campbell, if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, Andrew, looking at the lessons that you've spent a lot of time studying from Europe and trying to transfer them maybe as a look ahead to us, what 3 most effective actions should we be taking, and what strategic position as beekeepers should we be taking going forwards?
Gosh, that's a bit of a difficult one, isn't it? I would say one of the big things at the moment is to keep the vigilance up on Asian hornet presence in this country, because we haven't lost the battle. The MBU is doing a sterling job of nest destruction under very, very difficult circumstances. And while they can keep that effort up, our big priority has got to be educating the public to spot the hornet, getting it reported and getting the nest destroyed. But if we just lift our eyes away from that for the moment, I would say the next important thing is to make sure that we have got strong, healthy colonies, because it's strong, healthy colonies that survive Asian hornet predation. And it's a mistake to focus so much on the Asian hornet that we lose track of all the other things that are besetting our bees at the moment, because they are actually, we're losing more bees because of those than we will even initially from the Asian hornet. So that, I think, is the second priority. And I would say the third priority is not for everybody to rush out and buy Asian hornet defenses. I would say it's knowledge, education, teaching beekeepers to know the Asian hornet's life cycle, understand above all what is happening, both with the development of the hornet's nests in the environment around you and in your apiary, and educate people so they know. That's been one of the big problems in Europe, is they have this tremendous lack of knowledge, even 20 years after the Asian hornet invaded France. The bee health associations still say that over half of beekeepers don't know enough. So that's got nothing to do with have you got the defenses. That's simply people not really understanding what's happening. So education, strong colonies, keep up the monitoring and reporting, and supporting the MBU. But I would say supporting them by monitoring bait stations. There is minimal risk in that. I will say I do not think that the average Joe beekeeper should be getting involved in either nest location, if that means stumbling around in the undergrowth, because the chances are you'll stumble into one, or nest destruction. I think that's got to be left to the MBU, and I think they would prefer that to be the case at the moment.
And looking at just to pick up on the strategic aspect of it, looking ahead at schemes in Europe at local sort of and national levels, which seem to be, cost seems to be the biggest sort of drawback of them all. What schemes can work in reality?
Well, you've really put me on the spot there. I would say, personally, I think once it gets going and gets to the beyond eradication phase, I don't actually think any nest destruction schemes that center around beekeepers are going to, which they do predominantly in France, I don't think they're going to succeed. In fact, I would almost say I think they're a waste of time. I don't literally mean a waste of time, because they can hold things down, but at a tremendous cost. The best thing a beekeeper can do actually is learn how to do spring trapping in the vicinity of their apiary, because that can reduce hornet nest numbers in the apiary by more than 50%, and then to learn how to defend their bees. And the answer isn't always with trapping, because if you put bait traps out, it will simply attract the hornets. So they've got to learn the other techniques, which revolve really around some quite simple defenses, the muselier, the entrance restrictor. And only when we get to the stage, and I would think this must be years away, of any sizable predation, will we have to resort to the harp electric. So strategy, I think there are better things for beekeepers to concentrate on in defending their bees, rather than running around the country trying to destroy nests as they're proposing to do in Belgium. Although I recognise that that scheme is supposed to be to help beekeepers, I'm not really sure if it does. I've always thought right from the beginning of this that one very important lobby is out there that is at the moment not showing itself, and that is the British public. Because I think that when the Asian hornet gets to their village or their town or is in their suburb, they are going to be very, very vocal about the local authority initiating some sort of destruction for them. And in a way, nest destruction, this is not searching for nests, this is destroying nests that are already identified and known. I think there should be schemes to do that, but I think they should be publicly subsidized, not necessarily 100%, but I think they should be publicly subsidized because they are a form of insurance company that you share with everybody else in your community. It's almost like the Asian hornet is there in sufficient numbers. Okay, let's have an insurance scheme so that Joe Bloggs doesn't get done every time he gets an Asian hornet nest. We share it around the community because nobody knows where the next one's going to be. That, I think, is the future, but I don't think it will ever stop the Asian hornet once it gets going.
Thank you very much.
Patrick, you're back again. Quick question, and then we'll go to Frankie. Oh, Patrick's dropped off. Frankie, do you want to ask your question? Unmute.
Sorry. Go ahead, Frankie.
Thank you very much. The lecture was very interesting for myself as well. I come from the other side of from the east side, from England, from Zeelandic Flanders, and live in Ireland.
Oh, yes.
And I'm part in a WhatsApp group, and I have been active last year in Zeelandic Flanders because the hornets move northwards from Belgic Flanders as well, because the nests are not sufficiently destroyed over there. So what is often spotted over there is what you say, and I can confirm, when the leaves fall from the trees, the nests are easily be detected. But that is the moment when it's in fact too late to start to destroy the nest as well, because the queens are already being developed, they are already emerging at the time, they are already mated. And what happens then when they set the autumn trappings or even spring trappings in the next year? What has seen this year quite obviously that the new nests are also often found in the trees or in the areas where the old nest was found the year before, even if the nest has been destroyed. I would like this just as a statement of facts to put in this medium. Then the other points, because you are interested in seeing how they destroy or how they deal with the eradication or the maintenance of the Asian hornet in Belgium. The destruction of the nests in Belgium, they are allowed to use pesticides. In the Netherlands, it's not allowed to use. That's why they are using the diatem earth to destroy the nest. That is a fine sand glass method to destroy the cuticula from the hornets. That's also a huge difference. And what I have myself experienced as well, when they start to prick in the nest, it's paper nest, so you easily can miss the nest or destroy part of the nest that you are not efficiently in destroying it if you use the lancet. So if you use the cherry picker, then they should use also the hoover to destroy and to place also traps nearby, because hornets are moving. And in that point, I have a question to you, if you have any knowledge, if hornets, where the nest is only partly destroyed, they intend, if the queen is still alive, to rebuild this. But if the queen is destroyed, what is possible, will the workers also lay unfertilized eggs to keep the genetics more alive from a certain population, like the bees do for as a survival to keep the genetics around? And yeah, that is in fact the 2 points that I would like to ask to you.
Right, I got one of them was with the workers, just to make sure I've understood you, Frankie, would the workers try and rebuild the nest and effectively become drone laying workers effectively? The answer is I don't know. I'm not an entomologist, I'm a beekeeper. And would it matter if they did? Because you would just end up with a load of infertile, even if they managed to get a sexual out of it. I don't even know if they could. So I think I'm out of my depth there, and I will say I just don't know. I think you said there were 2 questions, and I don't know that I picked up what the second question was.
The second question was, if the queen survived an attack on the nest, would they rebuild the nest?
Yes.
Yeah, and the second question, sorry that I was not too clear. If the queen is destroyed, what is possible if you have a half nest destroyed and the workers start to rebuild the nest? Can they lay also unfertilized eggs in which you have a male coming out?
Frankie, that was the thing I said. I can't answer that because I don't know. I do know that if you try and destroy a nest and only partially destroy it, the workers will rebuild. Even if you, in fact, if you destroy the nest and the queen survives and enough workers will, they'll simply build another nest. That was the problem with I showed you a picture early on of the French trying to blast nests apart with shotguns, and that was always the problem. If they didn't kill the queen, they'd wasted their time and just ended up with a load of very angry wasps. Sorry, hornets. So I think I've answered your question, or I have to the best of my ability. I don't think I can say any more on that.
Okay, thank you very much. And
okay.
Thank you very much. Huh?
We'll take Patrick and then Gillian, and then I think.
Sorry about that. Very quick, bit of a follow on. So Frankie, really interesting to hear what you said. Please look at my thing in the chat. I'd be very happy to send you what the Dutch think tank EIS has produced, because the main vector for AH in the Netherlands, they say, is from Flanders. So it'd be really interesting to talk that through with you. Coming back to Andrew, my question is to do with Portugal. So Portugal's civil police are now being issued with gas-powered rifles, and they're not air rifles, they're much bigger than that, which fire something a bit like, it's a biocide bullet. And they're putting 5 or 6 shots into a nest, and this is turning out to increase their ability to eradicate nests by more than tenfold. And they're talking typically in the areas that I'm talking to, they're talking typically of around about 600 nests in an area 10 miles by 10 miles. So my question is, do you have any thoughts around, or are you aware of the use of techniques like that, and might that be possible to use in UK?
Yeah, we're okay. Right, there was a phase early on in France in the nest destruction where both fire brigades and pest controllers were using paintball guns with biocide-filled paintballs. And yes, it was extremely popular, but the French government have effectively stopped it because far too many of the paintballs were missing the target and disappearing into the environment, where they were just sitting there as tiny time bombs. They also weren't very happy with the idea, and this applies to drones as well, using drones to with probes to destroy nests. They're not at all happy with the idea of leaving a nest undestroyed out in the environment, because it will get picked apart by other creatures, birds particularly. So it's almost a kind of rule that if you use an insecticide on a nest, you have to take the nest down. Now, if you can take the nest down, then you don't have to sit there firing paintballs. So I'm sorry to hear that Portugal are now thinking of going into that particular loop. I don't think it's a very
Can I
good
come
one.
back to you very quickly? This is a bullet. This
Well,
is
it's no different.
No, it is completely different from what a paintball has done. So all I'm pointing out is that this is coming from central government in Portugal at the moment, and it's very, very carefully controlled through their ballistics and weapons staff in the police. So I am trying to establish the science behind that on low latency biocides so that there is an absolute minimum environmental impact. And this ties in with the fact that many jurisdictions are now saying that they want to see nests remain because it provides food and fuel back into the environment, but you don't want that to be contaminated. So hence my point in the chat.
So, okay, so Patrick, what are they using?
That's what I'm after.
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, if you can answer that question, it sounds to me like you've got a Trojan bait.
If anybody else on this call has anything that they can add, particularly on what the Portuguese are doing at the moment, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Now, Patrick, do you know what the Galicians and the Asturians are doing up in northern Spain?
Galicians up to a point, Asturians no.
They're blowing the nests up. They're using an explosive squib and literally chucking a gunpowder charge. I think it's 100 grams and 150 grams for the big nest. And they just they thrust it into the nest and blow the nest up, which leaves no residue apart. It blows the nest completely to smithereens. And apart from a loud bang, doesn't leave any kind of toxic residue around. If you can discover what the poison is that the Portuguese think they're using, that will kill a nest and yet disappear and not be a threat to anything, then I would say we've got a Trojan bait, because that's exactly what we're looking for. If we get to the point of having to catch large numbers of hornets in the apiary and release them to go back to the nests that have not been found, because the big problem is we're probably missing something like 50–60% of nests out in the environment that are never found and never reported.
Completely agree.
Time to do anything. And so we need a way of getting to those nests. And I would have said the Trojan bait is the obvious way to do it, but only with the right insecticide.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Gillian, you've been waiting very patiently there.
Hi, good evening, Andrew. Just
Hello, Gillian.
Small question. Other underlying health conditions that can put us at risk if stung by an Asian hornet, what are they?
Well, I'll tell you where that came from. It comes from the fact that the toxic effect of Vespa velutina venom is an effect on toxicity to internal organs such as the kidney, the livers. It also has an effect on the structure of the cell membrane around blood vessels, which is why it's a particular risk to cardiovascular patients. Cardiovascular people, by the way, are also overrepresented in the group of people who suffer more deaths on systemic reactions to Vespa velutina. So there are certain conditions. I think the best thing to say is not be specific, but just to say if your health is compromised, and we're talking here about somebody who is receiving medication, not necessarily beta blockers and things like that. That's not the same thing at all. But if they are receiving medication for heart conditions that perhaps have got lots of anticoagulants and stuff in them, then that's one way you're going to start saying you really shouldn't be going anywhere near an Asian hornet nest. Now, we're not going to fly a kite here because I don't want people to get over anxious about this point. But the thing is, if your health is compromised, you should not be going anywhere near an Asian hornet nest. Where does the danger lie? It is the Asian hornet nest. It is not the individual Asian hornet, because they, unless you are accidentally crushing one under your fingers, doing grape picking or something, you are unlikely to get stung by an Asian hornet. It's when you stumble across a nest and risk getting multiple stings, that's where the real danger lies. Now, I can't alter the physics of this. There are people who are more vulnerable than others. They need to know who they are, and they are the people who, for example, like the example I quoted, should not be volunteering to go off as an AHAT referent confirming that a nest is an Asian hornet nest. That's a completely silly thing for somebody with that sort of condition to do, because they're carrying a risk into a situation that is loaded with risk.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. We need to be selective about our monitors. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, not monitors, because if you're just monitoring a bait station, you're looking at individual hornets. It's this situation where you
Identifiers.
expose yourself to risk by walking towards the nest, and the risk there is that you walk into it.
Yeah.
You don't see it before you're on it, and they see you.
Yeah. Or you disturb their brambles, or
Correct.
yeah. Okay. All right. So when we're setting up our identification teams, there has to be a health questionnaire, effectively.
I would have thought I would think anybody organising this ought to have a risk assessment, and part of the risk assessment is to say, are you already a person who's compromised? I mean, if you had a beekeeper walk in, and there are plenty of them around carrying an EpiPen, I would say, thank you for your volunteering, but you're better employed somewhere else.
Yeah. Indeed. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I've got one question and then we'll wrap it up. There was in the chat there, it was asked whether there were any recordings of livestock being attacked by nests.
I only know, but it's just an odd one here. In that Monch table, the reports from Monch, I have to say, until the scheme started to get underfunded, produced phenomenally detailed reports. And the year I was looking at, which I gave you, 2018, they had, I think it was 5 cats, was it 2 cats and 5 dogs, one of whom died, 2 cows, one of whom died. But how a cow got enough stings to die, I really don't know. Whether it charged off into a wall or something, pass. But yes, livestock have been stung by the Asian hornet, that's for sure. But I only know of 2 cases, and that comes out of Monch.
Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much, Andrew, for an informative talk, giving us lots of things to consider and to work on. And we look forward to the rest of the Asian Hornet week. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A Zoom round of applause going on, Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
Very good.
I'm just working out how to leave the meeting now. Oh, here it is. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Very, very good. There's a checker here. Difficulty is to leave.